start from the beginning, which is just having the sample. I just search for this acapella online. Sometimes you just Google them and you can find them. Sometimes you can search in SoulSeek. Sometimes you have to use AI to get the acapella. I load it into my DAW of preference, which is FL Studio. But you should be able to do this with any DAW. This is very basic audio editing. So I already have this in the grid. So at the set BPM of the song, which is 111, and I have this set at the on beat.
Baby, ¿qué más? Hace rato que no sé nada de ti. Estaba con alguien, pero ya estoy free.
So what I want to have is on one side, I want a loop sample of the chorus, and then I want another one of the verse. So I'll select the chorus. Now, something that happens very often when sampling is that a melody may not start at the one beat, it may start earlier. So there's lots of times where I just have to cut here in this part of the sample over so that it loops nice. Now it should loop okay. And now I would just go and render that. I'm not going to render it because I already did. And another thing that I take notice of always is how many bars it is. This one is 16 because I like to put the length of bars at the end of the sample name. So when I save this, I save it to a sample folder that's called Provenza because of the song, and it's called Provenza 16. So I always know the length of my samples. Now let's go to the other side and have the verse. So the verse does start on the one beat. It has starved the chorus at the end. I just got that. And one thing that if you listen closely, you can notice in this acapella is that the volume varies a lot. I think that has to do with maybe the vocal had like a sidechain compression in the original song so that it would react with the bass. Well, what I'll just do here is just compress it. Yeah, just that default preset is enough. Sometimes you may even have like low end noise that you don't want in the acapella because it's like the original take or something like that. So I just like to take care of that here when I'm making the sample instead of then having to live with it from the Tidal side. I'll just close FL Studio right now. So this is my sample folder. I have samples in a very specific structure because since in my pulsar editor I always have them here, so I can just check all my samples here. This sample went to loops and to reggaeton vocals. Since I have a lot of samples of many singers, I have them also categorized by singers, and then I have this in like miscellaneous folder. Here's what it is, and here are the two samples. Now, it's my SuperCollider, my SuperDirt boot file. There are a couple of important things here. One of the important things is I made this synth dev that basically replicates this sort of like one knob multi-band compressor that's very popular in FL Studio. And I just put that at the end of the chain. Like I send SuperDirt to a single bus, and then that bus, I put this synth in the middle. So it just compresses everything I do a little bit, which helps a lot in many scenarios, mostly live, because you don't want to be live mixing while you're live coding. And also music nowadays is so compressed that if you're at like a venue, you just cannot compete with what a DJ can do. So I just compress the shit out of my live coding so that it sounds more like what people expect. Then this is my weird sample loading code. It's basically just tells it to try to load every folder that's like where my sample structures start and 3 levels deep. It was just the easiest, shortest way to write it so that it could load every folder without me having to worry about what structure I want them for me visually. And then I have some extra effects that I use. Let's just go ahead and boot the server. So we looked at my boot for SuperDirt, but a lot of my coding style is defined in my setup. I guess everyone uses the Tidal boot file. I just don't like to mess with it unless I have to like change latency or something. So I just prefer to have everything set in a different file. And I just load it with the script command that you can have in GEIKHA, the Haskell interpreter. So one of the main issues with that I had performing is that I want to go fast because I make a style of music that is fast and I just want to change stuff fast. A lot of my coding style came from that, experimenting to shorten everything as most as possible. So, for example, this pattern could be maybe the usual way of writing it. I write it like this, which is not like amazingly shorter than it. But when you start using stacks and everything, it just gets shorter. So I'll show you other stuff in my title setup. So I have lots of abbreviations for everything. Instead of this or this, instead of gain, I use the letter G. Instead of legato, I use the letter L. And there's a lot of those. I don't use every single one of them. I also have many misspellings of sometimes because when you're live coding, you may mistype sometimes very easily. It has some other shorthands. For example, I know a lot of people use this one that is like delay prime, being delay with every single one of the parameters that you can set for the SuperDirt delay. Then I do the same for tremolo and the phaser and the reverb and the ring modulation. Then I have some more custom functions, like for example, since I work a lot with samples that have bar length, so I have this function, for example, that lets me write stuff like. So now it just goes to the third eighth of the sample. I have one similarly for end. And this one is also interesting. So it would be like begin end. So I just put a divisor and have a length. They have where it should start. I can also tell that like just play the first 2/8 of a sample. And then I also have variations of the time loop function. You know, the time loop function just takes the first part. You know how title starts from cycle 0 and goes onwards? Well, it just loops from the cycle 0 to somewhere and just loops that. So I have variations where I can like offset that loop. Then again, for shorter stuff, I have some oscillators defined, some other functions that are more like utilities for me. One that I always use is this one called on one, which just takes out the first note basically in any pattern. So that makes it easier for some rhythms, like for example, the typical play it done. It have it like this. But that's not the rhythm that I want. What I want actually is something like this. And then these are the important ones that you may have seen in the Tidal Club forum. I use a lot. Basically, these are just variations of Striate and Chop. I have this custom function to just tell it the BPM instead of always having to type the division. I can see the BPM. I usually don't need this function. I can just call this function. Tidal will tell me what the BPM is here at the bottom. But one that I do use a lot is it now, which takes some amount of cycles, so 16 cycles, and just gives me the current cycle modulus, the number that I give it, so I know if I'm getting to like the end of a 16 bar loop. So that way, when I have very long samples, I can know when to trigger them. So you may see at the bottom on my console log it go up as time goes by, and then it goes back to 0 when it passes 16. If I remember correctly, I think Matthew's editor has something like that integrated. I think that was where the idea came from. Then for every sample that I have, I set the scale previously. For instance, here, when you don't know the scale of the sample, if you don't know much music theory, you just search and TuneBat or some other web page will appear. And this one said it was C sharp major, but that didn't sound well to me, so I just have to do a little bit more digging. I think it's A flat major, and I always have it set like this, so I just have to write Provenza and then any note that I want. Then I have this huge list of rhythms, which I find that are not as light codable as other rhythms, but I can just switch between them. And yeah, these are my footworks because every rhythm here is inspired by footwork kick rhythms, and I have a function to call them however I want. And then I have the Jersey Club rhythm. So now let's get to the actual stuff, coding the music. I'm a do blocker. So basically, you may have seen already that there's some people that like to write patterns like in different code blocks, and there's also people who like to put everything on a do block. I'm one of the people that always wants to use the do block, and I always have hush at the beginning so that at any given time, if I comment a pattern out, it just goes away. This is risky though, because it means that if I have an error in the middle of the do block evaluation, every pattern from the error onwards will disappear. But that's a risk that I'm willing to take. It has happened to me, but with practice, you get less and less errors. So I almost always have this part at the beginning the same at every musical code that I do. So I have hush, I have all ID to get any effects out if I put an effect on everything. I set the BPM, then I set the scale here so that I can just call this note prime function. I have everything on scale. This makes it you cannot use chords very easily. You have to like stack degrees of the scale, and that's kind of boring. But yeah, that's one of the trade-offs. And then I have a transposing, and then I always define elsewhere my kick drum pattern. So it's called KB because of kick bass. Since I do footwork and related music, the kick is almost always tied to the bass. So I just have them like that. Now for the sample, I just focus on the sample right now. Here I have this chat function, which is actually a chop add. It calls chop at the sample and then just slows it by any amount of cycles. So now I'm chopping it by 16 for 16 cycles. This being chop at prime with how I have defined it, and you can find these definitions at the Tidal Club post that I did. It just means that the 16th chops will be for each cycle. So it's actually 16 times 16, 256 that I'm chopping it by. So this is actually the same as writing, and this will sound the same. So yeah. Now then with most samples you will want to cut them or put legato 1 on them if you don't want them to overlap. Sometimes I do want them to overlap, but since this is a vocal, I just want the vocal to play well. I just do this. Yeah, now you can just start working with the vocal and change from one to the other very easily. I think the only thing that there is left to do is just perform, but I'm going to take in any questions just in case before I start performing. If there's anything that wasn't clear or that you have a question like, why do I do something away or the other, let me know.
One question I have is, could you explain again why are you using the all dollar ID? What does that do? Thank you.
Yeah. So in Tidal, when you have something playing, I think all lets you apply some function to all of it. So if I just play this and then I tell it to go fast too, everything will go twice as fast. And ID is a function, which is the identity function in Haskell. So it's the same. So right now it's actually doing nothing. So here conceptually it's just the same as the hash. So that if I have an effect here, bottom, for example, low pass filter, I can just comment it out, reevaluate, and it will go back to normal without me having to delete this and write ID here. Any other questions?
Just like a related question to this, thanks for explaining. Could you potentially do this for a set of patterns instead of all of them? Is there any way you found to do like I don't know, like array D1, D4, D5, dollar, and then you apply whatever effect to those specific orbits?
No, I think not. This is a question that gets prompted often in the Discord, but yeah, there's not really a way of doing it right now. That's a feature request for the future. Any other questions about code?
Could you go over the you had that big it looked like an array or something, the footwork? I didn't quite understand how that works. You just
Yeah. Okay. So this is an array of just patterns. G is gain. It's just an abbreviation. These are just gain patterns. So then when I want to use these rhythms, I just the function foot that I have defined here to call any of my footworks as I call them, and I just choose a rhythm and I play it with a sample. And since inside it uses the select function, I can also pattern that. Also, one thing that I should note, there's something wrong actually with this. This shouldn't be 24, which is the length of this array. It should be 24 minus 1. But I'm not going to change it now because of compatibility with my older code. But yeah, it's just like a rhythm selector that I have for a lot of useful rhythms for footwork that I have defined for myself. Your questions?
So with the Soundgoodizer clone in SuperCollider,
Yeah.
is that already attached? Do you have to call that in TidalCycles, or do you have it boot up with SuperDirt so everything runs through it?
Yeah, it boots with SuperDirt. So we can go a little bit step by step. So here I just define the synth definition, which is just the clone itself. Then I define an audio bus, which will be my main output for SuperDirt. So here for SuperDirt, I started and I send everything to this main bus, which is internal. It would not go out. And then here, after SuperDirt started, I have compre for compression. So I just start this synth and I send as the bus, the main bus, the same bus that I assigned to SuperDirt. And yeah, now this is already playing and I set the wetness of the effect, which is just part of what I put as a possible argument for the synth def here. Yeah, that's it. It happens in SuperCollider and I don't have to worry about it. The other thing that I do have to worry about is that if something goes badly with the audio, I always first try to use the panic function in Tidal instead of doing control in SuperCollider, because if I do control dot in SuperCollider, that kills all the synths and that would also kill this. So I would have to go back and reevaluate this part of the code. Any other questions?
Can you share that Soundgoodizer clone? Because I've heard very good things about that particular plugin.
I have a post about it in the club if you want to check that. Soundgoodizer.
Oh, awesome. Thank you.
So yeah, it's exactly the same code. The only thing about this one that I have to check, sometimes in some scenarios, I hear some bad artifacts. I think it's when there are very, very low frequencies, and that may have to do with this UGen, high pass UGen. Any other questions, or should I just start saying what can I do with the sample? I guess I'll just start. So I took this bass pattern from elsewhere because I know that it goes well with this sample. Usually I would search it live, but let's just save a little bit of time. So yeah, let's just see what happens.
Baby, ¿qué más? Hace rato que no sé nada de ti. Estaba con alguien, pero ya estoy free. Estás para revivir viejo tiempo. No salgo hace tiempo. Tú dime dónde estás. Y hace rato que no sé nada de ti. Estaba con alguien, pero ya estoy free. Estás para revivir viejo tiempo. No salgo hace tiempo. Baby, ¿qué más? Hace rato que no sé nada de ti. Estaba con alguien.
Thank you for having me again. Any questions? Feel free to ask them now. Thanks for the clapping.
Just wanted to ask, do you like record some of these, and if so, do you do that like in FL as well? And if so, do you just do all the composition all in Tidal and just record it as a live take, or do you do like edit it a bit?
I haven't recorded in a while actually. So last recording is that I have is like just recording for like for Instagram posts, or actually like the last algorithm that we did here in Buenos Aires was recorded. I haven't thought much about how I want to record them more as like full on remixes or songs. Maybe, yeah, I'm not sure. I feel good with the way that I can mix in Tidal if I have enough time. So I feel like maybe I'll just record the output and use that, and maybe edit it like I have done for some videos where I just cut exactly at the one beat in some part and I just chop them together to make an edit and make it shorter, because like coding can get long for what you expect for just a remix. But yeah, I'm actually happy enough with how it sounds straight out of SuperDirt with the Soundgoodizer too. But I'm just focusing mostly on live stuff. What I do mostly, I have like a set of songs which are like pieces of code that I've worked a lot on, and then I use as starting points for when I'm playing live. Like if I run out of ideas for at a moment, I just like go to like a different song, and I do that a lot. For example, this is a piece of code that I know how I'm going to start, and I have some ideas about how to work it. And then live, I can just change it as much as I want. This code, it has a very particular sound. I can always go to this, and it can be like a moment live. So I have like the sample from a Drake song. I know it. It's energy.
I got enemies, got a lot of enemies, got a lot of people trying to drain me of this energy, trying to take away from a nigga, fucking with the kid, pray for your nigga. I got enemies.
And I mixed that with a popular reggaeton song by Plan B. It goes like.
Es fanática de lo sensual, ella tiene una foto mía, ella me la puedo imaginar, hace cuando está solita, pero no me podía preguntar, y escuchar su voz cuando traída, por su manera de respirar, por imaginarme lo que está haciendo, si la broma no se pone intranquila.
And I have many of those like sample combinations that go well prepared.
Thanks very much for your presentation. It was super interesting. But I'm just wondering about bringing your own samples. Because you're chopping them up so much, do you feel like they need to be really tight when you like cut them up for bringing them into Dirt?
Depends on what I'm going to do with them, actually. If I know that I want to loop them in that way, then yeah, they have to be exactly the length that they have to be. But sometimes I just use them as one shots and let them run. Like, for example, if you look closely here, like this one that says vocales, which is vocals in Spanish, they are not meant to loop. They're like phrases, for example, used a lot in reggaeton. So I just use them like that. So it depends on the use that I'm going to give them.
Cool, thanks.